This video is brought to you by Masterworks. In the beautiful irony of Mark Fisher, we're talking finance, but we cannot escape it. If we are to be normal-ish humans, we still have to think about money, primarily how and where to store and invest it. We also cannot escape the common rule of never leaving your eggs in one basket, the concept of diversifying, which is the absolute main thing you should pay attention to if, God willing, we can all retire one day. Masterworks seeks to create an option for common people that used to be reserved for a larger, wealthier counterpart in society, that being art. Now, I completely understand art as a commodity is always a tough thing to swallow. I get it. But art as investment has existed for hundreds of years and only in the palms of the richest in society. Masterworks is an online investment platform augmented towards normal people who want to purchase shares of specific pieces of art, making it incredibly seamless and easy. If you purchase shares of an art piece, you receive returns when it sells. Of course, I am only me. This cannot be seen as financial advice, and you have to make those decisions for yourself. I also want to personally thank Masterworks for graciously sponsoring this video. If you want to give Masterworks a go, check out my link in the description below. If there is one constant in Mark Fisher's legacy, it's his ability to colorfully describe types of temporal, cultural, and sociological states we find ourselves in within the 21st century. His first text, Capitalist Realism, spoke on the ideological stasis of 21st century life, a narrowing of the possibilities of the future, a lifeless corporatization of political thought, if you will. A political thought that only sees progress as possible squarely within the confines of privatization, capitalism, and pure monetary function. His second book, Ghost of My Life, laid bare cultural and aesthetic reactions to this capitalist realism, bringing forth his concept of hauntology, a larger cultural malaise that haunts us, particularly being haunted by unfulfilled political, artistic, and cultural potentials of the past. This manifests as a desire towards retro aesthetics, unrealized futures that we saw during the mid-20th century. While not necessary for this video, if you would like to learn more on Fisher's capitalist realism and his concept of hauntology, we've done 2 videos on the topic, link above. This leads us to our third video on Fisher, on his work, The Weird and the Eerie. This is an incredibly interesting one, and dare I say, Fisher's most quote-unquote philosophical, in a sense, up to this point. While still completely engaged in cultural theory and analysis, The Weird and the Eerie contends with phenomenology quite explicitly. For a general refresher, or for individuals new here, phenomenology roughly meaning a philosophical study of consciousness and how we interact with the world through senses and sensory meaning. In essence, seeing the world through phenomena rather than substance or objective science and rationale. Anyhow, Fisher's The Weird and the Eerie puts phenomena in the forefront, encapsulating his concepts of the weird and of the eerie. We'll dive into the nitty-gritty, but in a unique spin, Fisher pulls heavily from Freudian psychoanalysis, while remaining in his traditional historical and materialist lens of individuals like Frederick Jameson. Fisher's The Weird and the Eerie really is a unique piece that I believe goes underappreciated amidst his larger work. That said, Fisher's The Weird and the Eerie isn't a very systematized work, thus can be a bit confusing if you are looking at concrete answers. Like his prior text, Ghost of My Life, he gives long droning examples by way of film, art, and literature. My main goal of this video is to bring forth a more concrete view of the weird and the eerie, while also maintaining some of the more loosely interpreted areas seen within his cultural commentary. With that out of the way, let's get into it. Right out of the gate, Fisher describes the weird and the eerie as finding symmetry in Freud's concept of Unheimlich, which Freud detailed in his 1919 essay, The Uncanny. On the uncanny, many consider uncanny to be the direct English translation of Unheimlich, albeit some debate this, including Fisher himself. Freud describes the Unheimlich as the strange edge of human phenomenon, something rooted in a category of psychological aesthetics. Freud details the feeling invoked by dreams, repressed, hidden desires. More material examples Freud highlights are doppelgangers, repetition that invokes a feeling of déjà vu. We can see the Unheimlich as something at the edge of rational human experience, where the unknown starts to pervade. But not just the unknown of the already repeat experiences we thought we understood. Just from Fisher's title, Weird and the Eerie, we can see why he would draw upon Freud. But Fisher wants to posit something outside of individual psychology, something beyond, as Fisher posits the introduction as beyond the Unheimlich. He states, "There is certainly something that the weird, the eerie, and the Unheimlich share. They are all affects, but they are also modes of film and fiction, modes of perception, ultimately, you might even say, modes of being." When contending with phenomenology and philosophy, it can be tempting to see things such as sensory experience, the senses, as something confined merely within the self. But with Fisher's approach of exploring the edge of art, culture, aesthetics, more philosophically, the edge of human experience, of human calculus, it cannot be firmly understood as something merely rooted in ourselves. Just like Kant's concept of the sublime, it can really only be understood in how it relates to structures we often consider outside of ourselves, things like culture, society, political institutions, and religion. Now, we all understand what weird means, something odd, out of the ordinary. Delving into an existing, well-known word ironically highlights the conundrum of the weird. Theory seeks to work beyond the shell of existing linguistic frameworks, of our standard language at large, meaning beyond lingual meaning. And in the case of Fisher's concept of the weird, perceptual experience beyond the definable. If that wording sounds a little confusing or pretentious, I don't blame you, but I find this clarification important and will make it make sense here. Language is never static. It's something that is in complete flux. A layered system where words, phrasing, can produce and contain multiple meanings. Being in flux and movement create holes between our perceivable time, the nanosecond occurrence that may scientifically exist but is completely outside of perception. Concepts like Kant's noumena, the thing, the all-knowing truth that we'll never be able to grasp because of our mere human limits. Perhaps real-world entities such as black holes may be relatively non-understood behavior in quantum mechanics. The things that shouldn't be there, that shouldn't exist, but everything else points to it otherwise. Fisher stated the weird has more than just cultural implications, something that contends with modes of being, a hidden portion of nature and metaphysics. And I find this is where the weird and the eerie lay. I find a hidden subtext in the weird and the eerie that points towards Fisher making almost his most metaphysical claims. An initial cursory reading here may indicate commentary, whereas we may find the weird and the eerie rooted in cultural theory alone. But I'll posit here that Fisher has a wider lens. It's a metaphysics or a phenomenology that then overflows into culture, into film, into the examples that Fisher writes about here. Fisher visualizes the weird as a phenomenon that can be seen from a number of areas in film, literature, and in art. But he starts out with the genre of Lovecraftian horror or aesthetics, highlighting the weird in our world with biological, Lovecraftian surrealism, the form of something like Cthulhu, a human-like visual but with anomalous tentacles pervading the space around us. Fisher also highlights the weird with the phrasing, "the door in the wall." He draws this from H.G. Wells' use of doorways throughout his novels. For the weird, existence is the seemingly understood flat surface that then jaggedly expands into a fractured opening. An opening into the weird feelings, aesthetics, questions about our existence, why we even exist at all. Fisher highlights a discussion here that is uniquely human, something at the very edge of our existence, that the weird and our human recognition of it therein is one of the least represented examples of what makes us human. It's around this Fisher highlights that the weird isn't something explicitly horrifying. It's a disjointed eeriness, the simple cultural constructs around self, gender, career occupation, status, our ideological adherence as subjects in the 21st century. This lack of concrete knowing, and our occasional brush with the strange and eerie feelings it invokes. One example I found particularly useful was Fisher's use of Philip K. Dick, useful as to understand the weird's relationship to time. History's simulatory effect and conceptual limit of cause and effect is at the forefront here. In the vein of thinkers like Baudrillard, Fisher highlights authors like Philip K. Dick who can envision a type of feeling based upon the historical and ideological presuppositions of a specific period. In this lukewarm world, ambient discontent hides in plain view, a hazy malaise given off by the refrigerators, television sets, and other consumer durables. The vividness and plausibility of this miserable world, with misery itself contributing to the world's plausibility, somehow becomes all the more intense when its status is downgraded to that of a constructed simulation. The world is a simulation, but it still feels real. This passage is from Philip K. Dick's book, Time Out of Joint, a science fiction novel set in a dystopian future with aesthetics similar to the game franchise and TV show Fallout. Think the progressive, atomic, American-centric aesthetics of the 1950s, but the same dystopian result of capitalism left unleashed and the blatant, bigoted stereotyping that was present in that era. All things satirized in Fallout. But even though we think of this era within rose-budded lens, we forget that this progress, or aesthetic, of the golden years isn't real. It's a simulation of what was, and in the case of Fisher, something that can be understood by the pervasive edge of the weird. Now, the weird may be a construct, an understanding, a phenomenon we can point to that represents the very edge of understanding. Something that shouldn't exist but does. But what may be a direct effect of this? That's the eerie. Fisher doesn't outright say that there is a cyclical, linear connection between the weird and the eerie, such that the eerie only exists because of the weird, but I find it helpful to understand that there is a common connection to the two that can exist in that light. One thing to visualize the eerie in conjunction to the weird is the recent internet phenomenon of liminal spaces. Artistic renderings of the backrooms. empty places that invoke what is described as liminality. Liminality is actually an academic term, but one rooted in anthropology and specifically ethnography. The anthropologist, sorry if I pronounce this name incorrectly, but Arnold van Gennep used it to describe the process of rites of passage in small-scale, often tribal societies. Roughly put, this liminality is seen within this type of passage, a state of cultural flux in an individual sense. Perhaps in post-industrial society, we can see this as graduating high school, or events such as this. But in a contemporary sense, liminality has taken on a more multidimensional definition. Going back to the relationship between the weird and the eerie, let's take a picture of what we could call a liminal space. The weird here is the strange and hyperspecific architecture of the wallpaper, drop ceiling, fluorescent lights. The eerie could be seen as the invoked feeling by this oddity, an emptiness of something that should not be empty. Perhaps this back room represents a doorway that also represents a type of real posited from psychoanalysis, or the socio-political reality of the emptiness of representative democracy, the moment of the untethering of years of institutional propaganda we're all fed in grade school, the intrinsic belief we're brought up upon that genuine power lies in the hands of Congress, or the courts, of representative institutions at large, when in reality, that very representation is just a simulation. It's not real. It's a face. A mask of power, if you will. But what sits beyond that mask is an empty husk, a back room. Like Fisher's example of the Lovecraftian use of doorways as portals, things like Capitol Hill, monuments of American political institutions that are supposed to be the actual power, but are only the mere faces of it. Real power lies here. I believe Fisher was writing this around 2015, and what's pretty impressive about this is that he was describing so specifically a feeling and conundrum that turned into an internet sensation just 5 years later or so. In some ways, the weird and the eerie could easily be the liminal, and it wouldn't lose its content. But Fisher's socio-political implications are what separates it. There's a wonderful video I stumbled upon by the YouTuber Eurothug4000 that highlights Fisher's use of the weird and the eerie with the video game Control. For anyone who hasn't played this game, which you should, I highly recommend it, the video serves as an absolutely wonderful example of Fisher's weird and the eerie in game format. But what makes this specific example so worthwhile is it highlights the actual socio-political commentary Fisher is making. After the video, go give it a watch. I will leave the video link here. But this is a good jumping off point. I wouldn't blame anyone for thinking that throughout the first 10 minutes of this video or so, or portions through Fisher's The Weird and the Eerie, what's the point of all of this? Sure, we can see the weird and the eerie, the liminal effects that pervade our existence, but why is this important? What's the overarching narrative here? While I don't want to spend time on selling you why this may or may not be important, I would like to still offer the position that theory, in its best form, is something that forces you to creatively grapple with the state of things. And in Fisher's work, his concern and his state of things are the cultural effects of neoliberalism and the pathologies of late-stage capitalism. The weird and the eerie can be seen as a theoretical bedrock and framework that allows us to make sense of strange forms of protest. From mid-century hippie movements to the use of psychedelics in a socio-political context, in line with Baudrillard's thesis in The Illusion of the End, that in postmodern capitalism, our civics have reached a point where protest, any seemingly ideological ingenuity, is simply captured by the past, that we've hit an apex underneath the simulation. That whatever we think is new is now permanently tethered to the past proper. That modernity is over. For Fisher, though, the bleeding edge of these movements that encompass things that are weird and strange are produced by a desire to truly want something new, in a landscape where many argue it's exceedingly impossible. While it's not explicitly stated in The Weird and the Eerie, there's actually a hopeful subtext here that, with the genuine presence of the weird and the eerie, it indicates that maybe novelty or something new is indeed possible. We don't have everything figured out. There are things that we've yet to grasp. And it's not that we're just stupid, mortal beings. In a funny way, this feels like Mark Fisher almost quietly telling later 20th century philosophy to jump off their pretentious high horse. Albeit, while also sharing similar ideas throughout his prior work. Mark Fisher's work can often be approached with a dismal sensibility, and while I do understand this, I think we're missing the larger picture of Fisher's work that contends with emancipation. In many ways, there is an element here that, without the dismal understanding of the state of things, we have no opportunity to explore the edge of it. The weird and the eerie, and the possibilities that can bring emancipatory futures into existence. Within the very weird edge of this existence, of science, of art, perhaps a new world is possible. As always, thanks so much for making it to the end. If you want to see more, join us over on Patreon. It's the best way to help ensure this channel keeps going. For the people that do help here, thank you so much. And for the individuals who go truly above and beyond, Cedric Watman, Kevin Hoop, and Kate, thank you all for going above and beyond. It truly means the world. Thanks to everyone again, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.